Thank you very much, Andrea, and welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here today with Bruno. Today we're talking about digital inclusion, and perhaps it might be a bit of a cliche, but what other topic could there be that is more relevant for today, right? With all the challenges that we're seeing with this pandemic. It's still amazing to see how we are still all connected here together around this platform. And for some of us, it was probably very interesting to find out how you can still be in touch with your colleagues and do your job, and probably also very well from your living room. I mean, it seems that despite all the challenges, the world has never been more connected than it is today. So the question is that actually true? On top of that, I think what is definitely apparent from this crisis is that technology companies are really shaping the world, the society, and the economy that we live in. From the infrastructure providers all the way to streaming services, it's just we are basically witnessing incredible changes to the fabric of our societies and economy. And of course, as impact practitioners, we ask ourselves the question, is this in line with the kind of change that we want to see in our society and economy? Is this consistent with the equitable society and sustainable economy we want to see? Is it consistent with the sustainable development goals that we want to achieve? So these are some of the questions that we want to explore today. I'm very happy to have Bruno here from the World Benchmarking Alliance. So we'll tell us all about that. We'll also introduce a tool to basically see how we can answer some of these questions. So Bruno, please, the floor is yours. I would like to ask you perhaps before we go into the heart of the tool, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about the World Benchmarking Alliance, and especially what the concept of how the concept of digital inclusion comes in your organization's mission and theory change?
Perfect. Thanks, Federico, for this introduction. Perfect introduction, actually, because it touches upon so many topics that we will discuss today, actually. But let me first introduce myself. My name is Bruno Besek, and I work with the research team at the World Benchmarking Alliance across multiple, actually two different transformations, system transformations or sectors, digital sector and financial sector. And my background was I used to work for 3 years as an impact investment consultant, and then I joined WBA a year and a half ago. But to tell you a little bit more about WBA, World Benchmarking Alliance, we are an independent organization that is backed by an alliance of almost 200 organizations. Actually, now I think we are even above that number. And these are organizations that are spanning from investors, governmental and intergovernmental agencies, academic research organizations, consultants, business associations. And we have the aim to incentivize and accelerate private sector efforts towards the SDGs. And we do that by producing free and publicly available benchmarks that compare and assess companies' performance and business impact alignment towards the SDGs. We are in this effort. We use a framework of 7 system transformations, which I will share the screen now with you. Just this one slide, so that you're more familiar with it. So these are our 7 system transformations and the framework that we use. And these are the transformations that have been identified over the consultation period of 1 year, 2 years ago, that are needed for private sector to put the society and the economy on a more sustainable path to achieve the SDGs. Within each of these transformations, we identified companies and industries that can affect the transformation or the system in the most positively or negatively. And across all these 7 transformations, as I said, we identified companies. We identified 2,000 companies most influential companies that are expected to put us on such a path. As you can see, at the heart of each of these transformation is a social transformation, where because at the heart of each transformation are people. People are driving transformations, and they are also affected by transformations. So all 2,000 companies will be assessed upon how they act ethically, how they respect human rights, and how they promote and provide decent work. And you can see around all these transformations, there is a financial system transformation, which needs to transform itself as well in order to support the transformations in different sectors. And now, Federico, to your point, one of these transformations is also a digital system transformation, in which we identify 200 most influential companies across the digital sector that can affect digital system transformation and bring the society towards a more digitally inclusive economy and society. So hand it over back to you, Federico.
Thank you, Bruno. So given the fact that digital is one of the 7 transformation areas that you have identified, well, it seems like there's quite a strong expectation from these actors, right, that make up this sector that you identified. So it's obvious that these actors need some kind of framework of reference to be able to understand, okay, what is the kind of progress that they're making, right, in paving the way through the transformation. And I guess the benchmarking tool tries to do exactly that. Can you tell us a little bit, before we get into the details of the tool, can you tell us why did you decide to publish this tool? By the way, I make a comment, this was published, if I'm not mistaken, last year in December. It's publicly available on the Alliance website. But why right at that time? And why did you feel that this was exactly the time needed for such a tool?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And yeah, to step a little bit back from the benchmark and identify why is it actually necessary. Once the SDGs were launched in 2015, digital sector has been identified as one that can enable the private sector to reach the SDGs. It has a cross-cutting role across all sectors in achieving the SDGs. However, these benefits are not spread equally. We have half of the global population is still offline, and billions don't have access to or don't own a mobile phone. Even if they own it, or even if they have access to internet, even if they are in the area that has quality access to the internet, they might not use it. I recently read a fact that 1 billion people that have actually the access to internet are not actually on internet, and this is due to the different reasons. And this is also in the light of the COVID pandemic. This is the benchmark came in quite timely, because COVID pandemic highlighted these 2 trends. First of all, it made us connected. And second of all, it also highlighted this problems that come with the use of digital technologies. It can create mistrust. It also highlighted the questions about how about issues related to the digital technologies. Children have been able to connect to and go to school online, but not all the children have the privilege to access the internet in the same way, not all children have the same skills to use the digital technologies in order to access education. So in that environment, we launched a benchmark in December last year. And the benchmark was created in order to highlight the efforts that the companies are making towards making the economy and society more digitally inclusive. But it also it is made to systematically track and transparently track these efforts. And the digital, so the benchmark is comprehensive. It goes across all different, it goes across and beyond just physical access to digital technologies, but it also is inclusive because it includes the whole sector. It's the whole ICT sector. It tracks how private sector is making efforts towards more inclusive digital economy, and it also highlights best practices. So since it's free and publicly available online on our website, companies can learn from it and actually learn from each other on how to drive digital inclusion.
One question before we actually get into the content of the tool, but how can we systematically look at a definition for financial inclusion or financial exclusion, if you want? I mean, you just remarked very rightly so that it's not just about access. What are the dimensions that we can think of to really understand if someone is really financially included or not?
Just to clarify, digitally included or financially included?
I'm sorry, I'm a practitioner of financial inclusion, so I always get,
no worries.
What's digital inclusion?
No worries. Digital inclusion is all about that we talked today, and yes, exactly what I mentioned before. It is about having a comprehensive framework that goes just beyond access and assess companies across that, because as I said, many people are in areas where access to internet is available, but they are not using that internet. So there are reasons why they are not using that internet. So during the consultations that we started 2 years ago, we identified that the framework should involve 4 different areas: improving access to digital products and services, enhancing digital skills, building trust to foster beneficial use of digital technologies, and innovate openly, sustainably, and ethically. So in line, if we apply this framework and think about those people who are digitally excluded, we can think of digitally excluded as those people that don't have access to digital products and services, but also as those people that don't have digital skills to use those products and services. We can also think of digitally excluded as people who lack trust and security and don't feel safe in using digital products and services. Think about also parents that have children using digital technologies, digital products and services, and they don't know whether this is safe or not. And also, if you apply this framework of innovation to digitally excluded, you can also think about being digitally excluded in a way that if you are a part of a specific social, income, ethnic, racial group, and companies are not considering this social, ethnic, racial, or income group in their product development, then these products will inherently be developed not for you. So in that sense, you're also digitally excluded.
Yeah, that's actually very true, especially the last comment that you made. It's not just that that product may not be for a certain group, but it actually may work against that specific group, which is something I want to touch on a bit later on. But just staying on the benchmark, on the digital can mean a lot of things. There are probably a lot of subsectors that fall under this. Can you tell us how did you choose which sectors made up the tool that you looked at, and did you see any specific trends that you would like to share with us that may be more visible in a certain subsector rather than another?
Yeah, for digital system transformation to happen, actually, we need to take a look at across the whole spectrum of and the whole supply chain of digital sector. To companies, those that produce end user devices, hardware manufacturers, to those that produce network equipment and semiconductors, to telecommunication providers such as Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom, and also IT services companies such as cloud computing platforms, software application companies. Think of for example, Tencent, that is the owner of the messaging app WeChat in China. So we needed to include all of them, and we basically included them according to 5 principles: whether they dominate the production in the sector, whether they dominate the market in terms of market share, whether they connect a lot of different supply chains. And one interesting thing is that we expected that bigger companies are going to have a bigger CSR program, bigger commitment to digital inclusion, just because they have more resources. But this connection between scores that we have in the benchmark and the size of the company based on their revenues is actually quite weak. So which was a really nice finding, that also smaller companies are thinking about digital inclusion. And now to your question about whether we saw differences between different industries, yes, of course. And the biggest difference, or the strongest difference, is between telecommunication providers and IT services companies. Telecommunication providers that are within the sample are much older companies, while IT services companies are much younger companies, and this can be one of the reasons why this difference in companies in industry scores are different. Telecommunication providers score much higher than the IT services companies. If they are longer, since they have been founded earlier, they established a more closer, more deeper relationship with their consumers. Telecommunication providers are also more regulated and have an industry body, GSMA, that actually cares about digital inclusion. So one of the main findings of the whole research process and the benchmark was that IT services companies, platform companies, need to grow up, actually, and take the responsibility that telecommunication providers already, for example, and hardware producers already assumed.
All of this data is publicly available, right? All the results, and these companies are all to be found on your website.
Exactly. Yeah.
To speak freely, can you tell us the 2 best-in-class cases that you saw, maybe for different reasons, that also maybe surprised you, or maybe that we all know as well?
I think it would be good to give one company that actually performed well across all measurement areas: access, skills, use, and innovation, and one company that performed really well in one of the areas. So the top performing company is Telstra, which is a telecommunication provider in Australia. And why it performed well across all different measurement areas is, first of all, is it because they have digital inclusion as a material topic within their materiality matrix. So their stakeholders think that digital inclusion is a really important sustainability topic. In access measurement area, they not only provide discounted services to low income groups, but they also thought innovatively about the services for specifically vulnerable groups of women that are victims of domestic violence, to provide them access to secure communication, secure and safe communication. In skills, they have programs that develop skills across the whole spectrum of digital skills, from basic to technical. And one program that really stands out is the program that teaches technical digital skills to indigenous people in Australia. In use measurement area, they're focusing, they actually provide and are transparent about data breaches and how many customers have been affected by these data breaches. So this is a requirement. Sorry about that, if you hear the noise behind, but this is a requirement from the GRI, and which asks that companies need to report on data breaches if they report according to the GRI. And this is also one of the highlights how we build upon other initiatives. And in innovation, Telstra is working with the Australian government to pilot an AI countrywide AI framework, AI ethical framework in the country. And in, for example, one company that really did well in innovation area is Microsoft, that supports open innovation. It publishes the data about the breakdown of staff members in research and development, in the research and development department. And it also provides, and it also has an ethics committee that oversees the research and development.
Thank you for that. I think I see a question from our audience. To what does location explain some of the results? Thinking about infrastructure, literacy levels, state control of information, and similar factors.
This data is exactly so we see that the location of headquarters of companies that we assessed matters a lot. European companies are much more have scored higher just because the sustainability agenda has been longer with them. However, companies that have programs in areas that don't have such a good infrastructure or digital literacy levels, we designed a framework that they receive much higher scores. So if companies have initiatives, programs in areas where the levels of digital literacy are lower, they would score much higher.
I also see a question on CSR, and I think that from Andrea, actually. I think this leads us into our next section, because so far we've spoken very much about, well, the importance of these companies, you know, what they're achieving is incredible. It's affecting all of us. But of course, with all this these great changes comes also a lot of responsibility. And of course, technology, digital is quite new. And when we see it over and over, when a sector is new, usually in the first phase, everyone focuses on the positive. I have an example. For example, when I was working a lot on financial technology, for many years, all you could see about that was mostly about, well, this is going to be our next silver bullet. It's going to solve all our problems. And only then later it became apparent that, well, not everything was going exactly in a positive direction. And sometimes, you know, companies try something and they're not really fully aware of what might happen. And sometimes things happen just as you know, as you are rolling out your products and services. So in some industries we're much further than others. Now for fintech, for example, there are a lot of associations that are looking at the possible issues of financial technology. There are a million tools available, so we're making steps there. When it comes to technology and digital inclusion in general, are we still at a stage where we're still very early on, where companies are not exactly on board with this? Are we still very much talking about separate corporate social responsibility initiatives? So really that kind of, you know, a department that is kind of set up and separate from the rest of the the organization. It's not really something that is centrally organized in the organization. Where are we standing in general?
Yeah. As I said before, Telstra, for example, has under its materiality topics digital inclusion, but this is only one of the few companies that has that, and the top performing companies have it. However, we are pretty far off from having digital inclusion at the forefront of all these companies, and this is mostly because their CSR efforts are mostly focused on topics that are not necessarily related to digital sector. One topic that really comes to mind is child online protection. We can all agree that children need to be protected, and there's one mind-blowing fact that in 2019 in US there have been 17 million reports of child sexual abuse material flowing through the internet. However, we find that only 16 companies out of 100 have a commitment to child online protection. 16 out of 100. So it is really on such a basic topic and such a material topic to digital sector. We see that only a small number of companies actually take care about. So while there are efforts, we are still far away from it. One other topic is that we see that companies are usually taking advantage of regulations. There's a case study, I would say, or example from the US, where California has much stronger data privacy laws than all the other 49 states. However, companies apply different data privacy mechanics and tools to California and other states. So they have the capacity to apply the same rules in all states, but they take advantage of the law, and that the law is much laxer in other states. So it still needs to ring a bell to companies to start acting responsibly. And also maybe the last example about data privacy is a sign to governments and policymakers to start developing much stricter laws, because companies are not assuming the responsibility.
Yeah, it seems like regulation indeed can play a strong role here. You also mentioned that the companies are more mature, that have been in the sector for longer, tend to score better. My question is, well, when it comes to technology, sometimes some of the negative effects that we are seeing are not directly visible, which makes it a very thorny, difficult issue. I'm just thinking, for example, all the algorithms that exist nowadays, right? Everything that you can think of, somehow there is an algorithm behind. It goes from, well, understanding whether you are eligible for a loan, for example. I've seen a lot of those algorithms across many companies. It can go all the way to understanding whether you will like a certain show over another. The danger here is that not only are these, well, some of these algorithms may look like harmless, but the way that these algorithms are formed can be quite dangerous, because not only can they, as you said before, ignore certain parts of the population, for example, minorities, but they also may be picking up on certain biases that already exist on the data that these algorithms are built on. How can a regulator really here take steps? Because it seems like a very, difficult issue to regulate. And should this really be for the companies to take a proactive approach in?
Yeah. First of all, your remarks just remind me of the book I just started reading, which is the Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which explains how data has just become the data that we provide just became a product for the companies, on which they develop other products that influence our behavior, and then that's That's really great remark that you made. On the regulator, on who should take the responsibility here, I think it's a dual role. For example, we see that, as I mentioned before, the example of Telstra working with the Australian government on building an ethical AI framework, countrywide AI framework, while companies are also doing it. And the thing is, the only thing is that not a lot of companies are doing it, and it's really hard to identify companies that are doing it. So 16 out of 100 companies that we assessed have ethical AI framework, and these are not all companies actually that are mostly active in the AI development. And there are various companies that we never thought of that we would find, which is a positive sign, but it's also a really worrying sign that companies that are the most active in the AI development are not having AI ethical policy guidelines. So I would say that it's a dual role. It's on one hand, governments need to monitor what is happening in the ethical AI framework and how companies are using the data that they are getting from us. On the other hand, companies also have a responsibility.
I think I maybe can add on that. I was looking at a lot of companies that were providing digital financial services through algorithms, and early on, none of them had this kind of framework in place where they were looking actively at their biases in algorithms, etc. It only became, it only helped by having more pressure from investors, for which I was also working for an investor, for example, but also associations in the sector, and then the thoughts started sinking in, and these companies slowly started to also build certain framework to make sure that they also cover that. So I think, indeed, I agree. It's a bit of a parallel process here, which also brings us to the point. Obviously the tool has been made for companies, but also probably there are many other kind of actors that can make use of the tool. So if you look, for example, at investors, or for example governments or NGOs even, what are some of the specific uses? What are some of the lessons that these actors can use?
I think there are a lot of different uses of the benchmark, and I think, for example, what you said now, that sometimes companies are following the government and government regulation, but they are also following them their peers. So, and that's the beauty of benchmarking, because they can see what other companies are doing, and that's also one thing that we often hear from companies. They want to know how their peers are performing as well. So the first use of the benchmark, I would say, is for companies to learn. And we already see some results of the December launch of the benchmark, where, for example, one company came to us because they wanted to understand how to improve their privacy policy. One company wants to bring the topic of digital inclusion to their headquarters and actually spread it out across different departments. And there's also one company that actually didn't participate in our research process, although about 50% of companies participated. But after they heard about the results, their sustainability department started asking about it, and then and now they're spreading the word around the department and asking how whether what we found out is true, and how they can engage further with us. So the first thing is this company recognition that they can actually do something with the benchmark that we created. Other uses of benchmark, of course, we as a World Benchmarking Alliance, for us, producing a benchmark is just the first step, but then comes the tough part, or also a really interesting part of getting that data to be used by other stakeholders, from investors governments, civil society organizations, because they can then further engage with companies on a one-on-one basis, on a collaborative maybe engagement. And one such collaborative engagement we are working currently on right now, where we're building the engagement across multiple stakeholders, one of which is our investors as well. And one such example is for example, Fidelity International, a big asset management company, highlighted its 3 sustainable investing themes for 2021, and one of these themes is digital inclusion. So they're working with us on how to practically implement that. Governments can also use our framework. Not only they have been also instrumental in the methodology development of the framework, quite vocal about it. Especially, for example, the Dutch government has been particularly involved in the methodology development, but also how to adapt the laws, or maybe even develop new policies around digital inclusion. For example, the topics such as data privacy, child online protection. These are topics that also regulators are really interested in. And of course, civil society organizations. It is really important that the civil society organizations that are focusing on a particular topic are engaging with companies then on this particular topic. We only, as a benchmark organization, we highlight what companies are reporting and score them against that. And then civil society organizations can say, oh yes, you reported on this topic in such a way. We want to engage with you because this is not how it should be really with regards to social norms, let's say. So one such example is UNICEF, that is identifying companies working on child online protection and actually not working as well. And they offer also a forum to discuss practical implementation of child online protection within the business. So they offer a forum to the companies within the benchmark to do so.
And as a consumer, maybe you have a personal perspective on that. Has that affected your choices in some way or another?
Well, I started not accepting cookies on any of the websites. So that I started to be really careful about that. And yeah, just less of the use of many of the digital platforms. But it's also, I would quote here one of my favorite authors, which is Anand. It's kind of a fallacy that consumers can switch, that consumers switching their behavior is going to make a change. Of course, because a lot of consumers need to switch their behavior in order to make change. But to really but we really need to hold companies and private sector accountable for their actions and for impacts that their products and services are making.
Thank you, Bruno. I would like to open the floor to questions. Before I do that, would you like to send a final message to the audience regarding the tool? Anything that hasn't come up so far in our discussion?
Maybe not anything that hasn't come up in a discussion, but rather just to repeat that that producing a benchmark is just the first step. And the next step is how this data is going to be used. So for everybody out there who is interested into how digital sector is contributing to the SDGs and making efforts to sustainable development, our data can be useful, and I invite everybody to reach out to us to work with us and promote digital inclusion within the digital sector.
Great. Thank you, Bruno, very much. And now I think we still have some time for questions, right? So perhaps I would like Rick Walters. You asked a very interesting question on Telstra and Microsoft. Would you like maybe to unmute yourself and explain a little bit more what you mentioned?
Sure, happy to do so. Yeah, just as per my question there, I guess I have being Australian but now living in Amsterdam, I have personal experience with both Telstra and I'm sure everyone in the world has personal experience with Microsoft. My perception is that not by everybody, but many of their customers, detest them as companies for many reasons. Why do you think they do so well in regard to digital inclusion, but not so much on customer satisfaction? Do you think it's almost they need to keep on proving their social license, so they're on the front foot to tackle issues like digital inclusion that they feel at least they can succeed with? But interested in your views on that.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Well, customer satisfaction is also about digital inclusion. How much are customers happy with their products and services, and because customers will be happy when the services are as inclusive as possible. And for example, in the example of Telstra, they are providing the low discounted services to low income groups, for example. However, there is a difference of real world impact and what companies report on. So I need to make a statement with an asterisk here, that we assess companies on what they report on. So if they report on digital inclusion in a specific way, we can only assess them according to that. But then this data can be used by consumer groups to actually engage with companies. And if Telstra performs well on digital inclusion and on digital access, let's say, access to products and services, consumer groups can engage with them and ask, listen, you provide low discounted programs for low income groups, but these products are not of the good quality, or they can then accentuate our work. And this is exactly what I explained before, that the benchmarking is just the first step, and then it's about creating more awareness with the companies on where they can improve.
Thanks.
I see another question. For investors of sovereign credit, is there a country level index? Assume that probably means also, if maybe not, if you are also having plans to relate this more at a country level.
Yes, there is a country level index on digital inclusiveness. I believe it's done by the ITU. So there is, and we build upon that. So this is one of the actually one of my colleagues actually used to work on that index before. So we built our framework also on the framework of that digital inclusiveness index.
Question from Camilla. Are you planning on benchmarking pharma biotech companies as well?
In current framework, I don't believe there are any biotech companies. It could be that biotechnology is one of the topics that digital companies within our scope are actually addressing. But no, within the 200, there are no specifically 100% focused biotech companies. And I believe I'm not particularly sure of other transformations, but it could be that they are involved in other transformations. And also it could be that if none of the pure play biotech companies are involved in any of the transformations, it doesn't mean that we are not looking at companies that are active in it. more influential companies with revenues much higher than those in biotech space.
Thank you. See, Andrea, you had a question on the negative or adverse impact indicators or positive ones. Maybe you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah. So I heard a lot of great things that you said, Bruno. So a lot of things that are pointing at positive impact. However, I'm also well aware that the supply chains of these institutions, especially the energy consumptions of software companies or of data cloud services, etc., there are, of course, negatives that come aside with these potential positives. So I was curious if this has been part of the framework that you've used.
Specifically environmental metrics or topics have been discussed, but we decided after a series of consultations, as I said, the process of the consultation took 2 years across the globe to involve as many different stakeholders in the development of the benchmark as possible. And the conclusion was that in order to transform digital system, digital sector needs to become more inclusive. So environment wasn't one of the topics that fits the digital inclusion. And also just to note is that we also build benchmarks that are building upon other initiatives and that are not duplicating any work. So there are a lot of other indices that are tracking environmental performance of digital companies. So we also didn't want to duplicate that work. On your point of negative impacts, I mentioned at the beginning that there's at the heart of that wheel that I presented at the beginning is social transformation that asks companies to act ethically in terms of their taxes, in terms of the living wage, in terms of political influence, to promote decent work, and to respect human rights. So they will all be assessed on these 3 aspects.
Yeah, thanks. The reason I ask is because, of course, with more use of digital technologies, hardware specifically, of course, you end up getting you hear these waste horror stories that in and of themselves have their own social challenges. So it's a lot to balance.
For example, yeah, that's actually a really good example of how some of our companies will be assessed across different system transformations. So hardware producers will be assessed in our within our circular transformation work. So because they create devices that actually end up on a lot of them end up on a wasteland. Circularity is also one of the things that we need to assess them on.
Thanks.
Great. I do not see any further questions, so perhaps I would like just to reiterate that the results of the tool are online on the website. You can see for each company how each has scored. So I think it can be interesting for all of us as consumers, but also I think if you are interested in ways that you can probably cooperate with Bruno or with the World Benchmarking Alliance, I think Bruno will be more than happy to connect with you. So be in touch. And otherwise, I want to thank you, Bruno, for your time. And
thanks.
yeah,
thanks for inviting me. Yeah. And have a good weekend, everybody.
Super. Thanks, Bruno and Federico for this great session, and to all of you for joining. Yeah, I certainly learned a lot, so I hope that you guys did too. Yeah, indeed, I would invite you to go to the World Benchmarking Alliance website and check this out. There's a lot to discover there. So for now, thanks again, and wishing you all a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.